Okay, there we go. Yeah, while the microphone gets the lady in the yellow there, I'll say there's one other option for Christian education. Is also there's a thing called online schools now, where you'll get a tutor that will teach over the computer. So the Emmanuel Online School is in this country, and there's Logos Online and Kepler in America, and all sorts of. And so that's another option which I didn't talk about. Anyway, question.
Hi, so I am currently in my second year working in mainstream education, so I'm training as a secondary school teacher.
Yeah.
I was home educated until I was 16, but I've now chosen to go into mainstream education as a career path. How can we as mainstream teachers have an element of Christian education, even working in secular comprehensive schools?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I taught in the secondary school for 5 years. Sport, as I said, and RE as well, a little bit of RE. But on one level, depending on the subject you're in,
Geography.
Yeah, so you can't be explicit. Clearly, you're not allowed to be. Doesn't mean you have to obey the law, but you won't last very long if you don't. I mean, that's the reality. I would be praying to the Lord for wisdom in something like geography or other subjects. Say, how do I communicate the wonder of the world that God has made to a group of students without being explicit about, Christian truths? And ask the Lord to give you those opportunities and wisdom to be able to do that. But it is becoming a more and more difficult place to do those things. Because most of the work that happens, so I taught in a private Catholic school for 4 or 5 years, and I was an RE teacher. You can always preface the lesson with Christians believe, and there you go. You can preach the gospel for 40 minutes. And I did that quite regularly. But what I found, certainly working in the Catholic school, was much of the work, especially as being a sports teacher and traveling on coaches, much of the work was done when students came and chatted to you, because they knew you were a Christian. And so firstly, make sure your identity, they know you're a Christian. Don't hide it. Be explicit about it. Everyone should know. And that will raise... And then when the student asks you a question, as a Christian, you're a Christian, what do you think? You're able to answer it. But the environment, from what I understand, because I've only been back 6-7 months in the country, is even more difficult to do it on a personal level when students ask you for a personal thing. So you need a lot of wisdom. And you need to, I would say this, be prepared to be sacked. Okay, fear means, and you can see it operating in all levels of society, and it's operating in the church more and more. Fear causes you to just keep lowering your voice on certain things, eventually to the point that you don't say anything anymore that would cause offense or cause trouble or get you into trouble. And therefore you get individual Christians or churches unwilling to speak about certain things in certain contexts because they know it will generate a certain response. So I think if you're working in secular education, you go, Lord, I want to be faithful in every situation I'm given. I don't want to deny you before men. Give me the wisdom to know how to work and be prepared that could cost you your job at some point. I think we just have to be, in the way the world is at the moment, we have to be prepared for that. Go about your job joyfully and see what happens. But it's hard. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thanks.
Here at the front, Tom.
Yeah, kind of two parts to this question. One, you mentioned you homeschooled kind of in isolation. What did it look like for you, or what would you do in terms of supporting other homeschoolers in that, and I suppose creating a bit of a network? Part two to the question, you mentioned co-ops. You often get this difference between one homeschooler and another, and that could be as big as a homeschooler and a state schooler. So how do you what would the foundations of starting to consider a co-op potentially look like? What would you speak into that?
So the first question, the first thing you do if someone is homeschooling in a more isolated context, you just have to encourage the faithfulness. Have to encourage faithfulness and just keep doing what you believe is right to do before the Lord. And it will, and do it well. And I think what you find is, and this is a story that can be retold in numerous situations, people will see the fruit of what you do and will want it. Okay. The most striking thing that people said about our family, and this is not a high bar, okay, we're talking about, they would say, your children sit in church with their Bibles open and listen. You're like, is that really a big deal? Wow. And they're like, we want our teenagers to do that. So there's an element of faithfulness will produce fruit, and that fruit will be attractive to some. And you always have to stress, we're doing this for our immediate faithfulness. We want to obey Christ, but ultimately we're doing it for generational faithfulness. We want to see our children and our children's children. God has made some promises. He thinks generationally, and we're wanting to think generationally, and you have to sometimes go, you're playing the long game here. I'm 55, about to start a Christian, Lord willing, university. That's for my children's children. And I may not even see that. But that doesn't matter. That's the attitude we have. Luther said, Luther was asked, what would you do if you knew the Lord was coming back tomorrow? He's planted a tree today. You're like, what a stupid, no, it's not a stupid thing, because that, whatever you're doing, do it now. But you've got to think long term, always thinking generationally. Second part of the question, it's, five Christians in the room will think differently about something, if not everything. And what does unity and faithfulness look like? And you have to be careful not to divide over issues that don't need to be divided over. And if there is a difference of opinion about something, it doesn't mean you have to divide necessarily. It just means, okay, you do that, and we're going to do this, and we'll cooperate on this. So I think we're always looking to work as a body. I think we have to think in a community and Christian church context and the body of Christ. It's not always possible, and that's a reality, but it doesn't mean you have to, there's division there. You just say, you know what, we will do things differently on that issue. Can we work together on this? And that just takes a lot of wisdom. That's where I think churches are really important. If the culture of Christian education and the importance of Christian education is being communicated from the pastor and the elders or leaders, whatever ecclesiology the church is, that makes it easier for the people within that community to work together on a Christian education front. It's when, and unfortunately that isn't happening very much. This is a grassroots movement essentially, rather than church leaders seem to be the last ones to get the idea that it can be a little bit more difficult. But then you'll go into that with your heads up. The Presbyterians and the Baptists can work together very well. And the pre-mill and the post-mill people can work together quite well on certain, maybe the length of the vision is a bit shorter for one and longer for others. So you need wisdom. You do need wisdom. But you have to be aware that, and I learned this, sending a kid to a Christian school doesn't mean you can cease to be discerning about who they are friends with. Especially a Christian school that incorporates a whole range of Christians. The bigger the school is, there's still going to be people there you say, you need to think carefully about who your friends are as well. Okay?
Thanks, Tim.
Yes.
What is the biblical way of balancing financial provision with having a large homeschooled family with regards to a single earner? Should you size your family with regards to finances?
No. But at the same time, don't be stupid. I mean, there is the Lord provides. I think our general attitude towards family and children should be the more the better, in one sense, but not necessarily, having feral children running around the neighborhood because you can't cope with them is not a blessing to that neighborhood. So there's wisdom involved, but fruitfulness is a good thing. And I think it doesn't actually, home education doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It can do. If you want to bring in tutors to do particular things and the buying of resources. Again, in community, you can share them. You can. So I don't think money shouldn't be the determining factor in the decisions you make. It's one factor that you bring into it. And the Lord provides. I think we just need to live by faith. We need to work on living by faith. We need to fight the good fight to stay in the faith. That the pressure of life and the world is always to fear and not look to Christ for all things. And the more technological our society gets and the more complicated it gets, the more the pressure is to not look to Christ. So I think, I sort of understand biology and I know what happens, how children are made, but ultimately it's the Lord. The Lord opens the womb and he closes it. I said to my students when I do ancient Near Eastern stuff, I said the ancient Near Eastern world in many ways has much to teach the modern evangelical. They said, look at me, what do you mean? I said, well, they had gods for everything. Absolutely. You needed rain. You had a god for the rain. You had the storm god. You had Baal. He would come and provide the rain. And you needed a baby. You had the fertility goddess. And you needed this. You had this goddess and this god. So they realized they were utterly dependent upon the gods for their life. I said, and then Abraham meets the one true God. And everything that those little gods did now had to be done by the Lord. And that explains so much of Israel's unfaithfulness. As things were going difficult, I think maybe the old ways were better. There's, goodness me, we desperately, it's not raining. What do we do? Well, maybe Baal could work. But they understood their complete dependence. Most people, when it comes to having children or fertility, they think they're in control. Absolutely not. You have absolutely no control The Lord lets you think you do sometimes. But doesn't mean you're foolish and you don't use your brain and walk in faith, but you trust Him. So every situation in your life is an invitation from God to trust Him. Everything. And if you choose to go down the Christian education route and the homeschooling route, then those invitations will come a little bit more often. And you'll feel them, and they'll be there. The one income is a challenge across all. It's not just a Christian education issue. Our whole economy and housing market is built on two-income families. And we have to be different. We have to be different. And if that means we don't get as nice a house as we would have liked, much better to be faithful and obedient than live in a nice house. I also think that the Christian church has to stump up and start providing for their people as well. People need to give more. But, yeah, that's another issue.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Is there any current government oversight as to the type or quality of education that you give your kids in this country right now?
It depends from and Judy, you can correct me if I'm out of date here. It depends on local council to local council. So if your children were in school and you took them out, then you'll be registered as a home educator and you will be inspected depending on where you are. And depending on the inspector will depend on what that looks like. So we were inspected once a year. The first lady was lovely. They liked what we were doing, and she would sit down with the kids and look at their work, etc. The second one didn't even look at their work. His concern was simply, are you abusing your kids? It was a safety thing, because that's the world he was been in. And he said to us, as far as I'm concerned, you should never see me again. You're doing a great job, but I'll have to be back next year. Other people in different parts of the country had different experiences. But if you've never sent your kids to school, they don't know. So my advice would be never send them to school. And then no one knows. And then you're free to do whatever. Am I out of date, Julie? Yes. No. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I remember one conversation with the inspector. He saw we had a menorah on the thing from our time in Israel. He said, "Oh, you teach your kids Hebrew and you've got a menorah. Do you think it was a good idea to keep the Old Testament?" I'm like, buckle up. Here we go. And that was it was very fun.
Hi. My question, I guess, two parts of question. First of all, how does a Christian education look like practically? So do you adapt secular resources, or do you look for Christian resources? And secondly, what if Christian resources, what do you recommend?
So the amount and quality of resources coming in from Christians involved in Christian education, primarily in the States, but also in this country, there is increasing year on year. I mean, there are so many resources. So let's say use one example. Classical Conversations, the Christian Homeschooling Network, will provide you with all the resources for the education according to the age group. And you teach in community, and you get all their resources. Somewhere like Veritas Press or Logos Press provide textbooks, provide all the reading for those textbooks in packages. They're American spelling, unfortunately, and sort of certain cultural things. But they're Omnibus is a classic example, which is on the back there. There are so many resources. It's incredible. So in that sense, you could do all sorts. There's lots of, again, money would be a question, whether you can afford them, but then you can group together and share the cost with people. And the UK is a little bit behind on producing its own resources, but I think that will come. But in one sense, you don't need to necessarily, because certainly the classical Christian education market, which in the US is the one that's producing so many resources, is building off of Western civilization, the great texts of Western civilization, and you can get English versions of those over here. So there are lots and lots of resources. So for example, maths resources, and I'm learning to say maths again rather than math. We did a Singapore curriculum, which was brilliant. I can't remember what it's called. Steve, do you remember? Singapore Maths. There you go. It's in English, which was helpful. It's hard. I remember my 8-year-old son coming and saying, "I can't do this sum," and I sort of worked it out, and I remember getting it right and sort of cheering. And he sort of, "Dad, that's not encouraging." I'm 8 and you're excited that you got my sum right. So that you just pick and choose, do your research. I mean, the internet makes life easier, obviously, now, and more difficult in some other areas. So there's lots of resources. And depending on where you live, there will be human resources around. Retired teachers who are Christians and who want to assist people do things. Again, the Lord provides. We've found that all the way through. You need something, and you pray, you commit it to the Lord, and 2 or 3 months later, the person you sit next to in church happens to be the answer to that prayer. And they find out your home education would love to teach your children maths. Oh, well, let me bless you then. I can provide children for you to teach. Lots of them. Was that all the questions? Did I miss one?
Yeah, the other questions like, do you use secular resources and then adapt them?
Do I adapt them? Yeah, some you can do. In one sense, you're going to have to, if you're going to do literature, if you're going to do science, if you're going to do any subject, there will be secular texts that you read. And I say Christian education isn't about hiding your children from those things. It's about teaching them how to deal with those things. And so you want them to be reading a text that is not Christian, perhaps anti-Christian. You want them to be studying that and reading that with you or with a Christian, helping them to walk through. This is what that person is saying, and here's the reason why we would think that would be wrong. And so I think Christian education shouldn't be reactionary. Some Christian education is sort of unwarranted chest thumping. We're right, the world is wrong. Nietzsche doesn't know what he's talking about, or Plato got it wrong, or whatever. And you ask them, well, what did Nietzsche say? Or what did Plato say? What did Darwin say? And then there's silence. You go, well, you can't tell me he's wrong in any meaningful way, other than the fact that he's wrong, which has some meaning, if you haven't understood what he said. And in order to understand what he said, you have to read them. And you have to read them carefully. So in one sense, to love your non-Christian neighbor who's a dead white man who wrote a book 200 years ago, in order to love him, you have to give due diligence to understanding what he or she has said. And then be able to explain it in a way that if they were alive, they go, I recognize myself in their explanation. And then you go, and this is why we think you're wrong. So that's the sort of Christian education we're talking about. So you have to read secular texts. That's where I would disagree with fundamentalism, where you're like, no, we're not going to read any of those things. So I remember giving a talk on Christian education somewhere, and I mentioned Shakespeare. I can't remember why or what I was doing, and the response was, why would you get your kids reading Shakespeare? There's some really unpleasant things in there. I'm like, yeah. But like the Bible, there's sort of unpleasant things in there. In fact, the Bible is some of the most unpleasant things in. But you walk the children through it. And at an age-appropriate level. So we don't treat into a ghetto of just my Christian tribe's interpretation of Christian stuff. I don't think that's education or Christian education. In the front here.
I would just be interested to hear a little bit more about what you touched on, education versus qualification, and perhaps a bit more the practicalities of what that might look like in England. Thanks.
So I think we're living in an age where education has been reduced to qualification. The whole point of going to school is to get a number of GCSEs and A-levels, which will enable you to get to a university of a certain rank, where you'll be able to get a degree, which is a qualification which will enable you to get a job. So it's a utilitarian vision of education that ultimately serving the market. Now that's not education, that's training. I want my engineers who build bridges to be trained to build the bridge well. I want the doctor who treats me to be trained. I remember we invited a washing machine guy to come around and look at our washing machine. He said, I'm going to have to pray about this one. I'm like, I just want someone who can fix it. I don't want someone who needs to pray about fixing it. And I understood what he said, and he did fix it, so bless him. But we want people who are trained. But that's not education. There's far more to education. So and we're going to talk about this afternoon, education encompasses the moral, spiritual, and the intellectual. And we can't divide those out. And in the intellectual involves more than simply a utilitarian acquisition of knowledge to an end that is job focused. God has made a world, he's very profligate. He has made a world of fascinating complexity and interest and beauty, and he's made a whole load of people who are interested in different things. And enjoying God and glorifying God and loving him in the education sense would be to incorporate all those things into your education. So if I had to jump ahead to this afternoon in terms of thinking of a curriculum for Seldon College, there'll be things that we would teach which were examined, and there will be things in our curriculum that would not be examined but would be essential to their education. So that's why I would think that's what I would distinguish. And you also have to remember that education is happening in one sense, or catechesis is happening all the time. Children are being trained to think all the time by everything and everyone. When they listen to music, when they watch their films, when on their computer games, or when they're reading books, when they're talking to their friends. That's how I think. But I'm not saying qualifications aren't important. I have got lots of qualifications, miraculously. I can tell that story another time, but it is miraculous. So it's not that they're not important, but I think I think they should be subservient to the loving of God with your mind and enjoying all His world. Does that sort of help?
Yeah, I guess my other question was just about the practicalities of it.
Yes.
In this country you mentioned, and I know in the US it's just easier with being able to continue your children's home education and then have them, have a transcript for them. But I guess my question is, for GCSEs or that version, how would you go about deciding which is best? And do you know of any good specific online, maybe GCSE courses versus companies that can help put together transcripts? Just some of the practical what that looks like.
So the first thing, you don't need to do 33 different GCSEs and 6 A-levels, like the sort of trend where they're going. You just don't need it. It's not important. If you're going to do GCSE and A-levels, be tactical. Go, I'm going to do these 4 or 5 that are necessary, and A-levels are more important than GCSEs, and pick the ones that you want to do. And how you would go about doing that, so that there are online tutoring services that enable people to do certain A-levels. Some people are happy sending their children to sixth form college to enable to do that, or because they only need to be there for class and they can come home and do their work. So the GCSE A-level route is the easiest route into higher education. But the English universities do accept the SAT. So there's no reason why you have to do it. You could do the SAT and carry on doing all you wanted. There are, I think, Steve, am I right? Emmanuel was thinking about doing the IB, International Baccalaureate. Emmanuel Online School, which is a Christian education, exploring the International Baccalaureate. Again, which is recognized by universities in this country. I would also say, look at your children. What are they? So when I went to university, first time around, I didn't go to university. I went to a college of higher education because I wasn't clever enough to get to university. Literally. I was rejected by lots of everyone. So you had the threefold. You had university, the polytechnic, and the college of higher education. And depending on where you were at and what you think we were going to do, you would go to that particular level. And of course, that makes people feel, less wanted or less intelligent, equality and diversity. So everyone has to go to university now, which is a nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Part of it is to keep them out of the unemployment figures and all the things. So I think we can take on so much of how the world works culturally and in the UK. You don't have to go to university. You really don't. If someone's skills are in a different direction, pursue that. Do it differently. Pray about it. I have a son who's at art school, fine art. Not even just art school, but fine art. In worldly terms, in one sense, mad. Who's going to earn a living? Lord willing, he will. But he can't not paint. It's the way God has made him. And so as a dad, you go do it. Go do it. I had another daughter who could have gone to university, who could, done very well. So I don't want to do it. There's nothing. There's the happiest, with our hands in dirt and growing things and gardening. I said, don't have to do that. But you're then outside of the system, but we have to think differently. And that was in one sense, the 9 years in America, there's still that system there. There's still that funnel. But there's an element of do it, try something, step out in faith, go on, do it. We need to be getting used to pushing back on the mold that is trying to make us into a particular shape and doing a particular thing. And we have to ask the Lord, what's best for this child? And if it's not university, that's fine. You don't want to destroy all hopes of success in their life. Some GCSEs might be appropriate. Where are all the Christians starting businesses? Or trying to start businesses? In the UK. How many people here know I know Thomas started. How many people here know someone who started a business? One. As an American, I knew people who started several businesses. Most of them failed. But, that's how you think. Well, I'll start something. I'll do something. I think we need to generate that mentality because it's wealth producing, it employs people, and it's a safe place. It's a business that has certain principles is a great place for Christians to work. And I think we have to cast off so many of the shackles that have been placed on us and think differently about everything. And if you're not home educated now, if you're not homeschooling, or as soon as you start doing that, I said it to Dave, a year and a half ago, that who knows where that will lead. It's a dangerous thing to do. Dangerous thing to step outside. What's Gandalf says? It's a dangerous thing to step outside your threshold, or whatever it is in The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit, yeah. And when you do that in a Christian education, you're going to produce kids who are not in the mold, and you really need to lean into that. And again, I'm saying it as someone who's got loads of degrees. But, yes. It's 5 to 12, so I know there's one here. So we're going right, and then to the front, and then.
I was thinking, often when people think of homeschooled kids, they think of them as quite sheltered and not had any experience in the world. How would you healthily expose your children to sort of, a healthy dose of the world without, endangering them, basically?
There's no prescription for that. It depends on local context and opportunities. Clearly they don't experience the world in its full day in and day out as you would in school, but they do experience the realities of sin and things just in their family and in the church and there. But you just have to seek out opportunities, not be afraid of them when they come. But it completely depends on context. So growing up in Oxford, homeschooling, girls did a little bit in gymnastics club down in Abingdon. They did some athletics. So there were some sport opportunities for them to do. My youngest went to a ballet dance class. So that there's always going to be community involvement with certain things, which will have that sort of engagement. And as they get older, I think you're as a parent, you're wanting to give them more and more freedom, because that's the nature of parenting, in order to prepare them for adult life. And you're looking for opportunities for them to be a little bit more independent in certain things, whether it's holiday jobs, whether it's volunteering in different activities. So it's a wisdom issue, and it's determined locally what opportunities there are. But as you want to do it, I was talking to the teenager who was doing that. You want to do that in relationship with your parents, and that conversation needs to keep happening, because there's still lots of navigation to happen and wisdom that you will need. But yeah, that's what I think. So going to the front, and then we'll. That was your kind of your question, is it? Okay. Do you want to nuance it a bit more?
Yeah, well, I was just specifically going to ask about, I guess, as a parent, so our eldest is 10, but we're already thinking, 6 years, 10 years' time, that's a long time off. But, we're going to be thinking about, transitioning out of Christian education in some way. And you don't want that sort of cliff edge, right, where like, you're moving out, you're not going to be in school, we're not going to be here, you're going to be making your own friends. Yeah. Could all go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the aim, in one sense, this is again, Christian education, if you go into Christian education as I'm going to protect my children from the horrors that are out there, which is utterly understandable because there are some horrors out there. But if that's your only goal, then your Christian education will take on a particular flavor that may not prepare them well for that moment when they do go out into the world. So if you take your stance as this is a good in and of itself, and it's world affirming and creation affirming, and it's educating them in the truth of God and all things in relationship to Him, there will be a positive outlook on it in such a way that they'll be a little more prepared. So if you're sort of retreatist and protection and the sort of mother hen and don't look out there, it's a horrible place, children, by the time they do go out there, then they're not going to be prepared. So your actual stance in terms of the type of education you give will help in that way. Secondly, you don't want to lie about the world. Sinners can be extraordinarily nice people. Okay, and if you've told them for 18 years that those horrible people who are X, Y, and Z, whatever their particular sin is, and usually they're sexual sins of some description, they go out in the world and the first person they meet is that person who is a delight and is actually nicer than most of the people in their church. Then you haven't prepared, then they're going to, everything's upside down. So you have to speak the truth all the way through in Christian education. I find this, done a lot of stuff in biblical studies, and if you say, give someone an idea of the Bible that is unreal in terms of its physical, textual history and all those sorts of things, which is another issue. But in order for them to go, this is the word of God, you create certainty through falsehood. Then when they get out into the world and they're confronted with some of the things you've told them that aren't true, their certainty crumbles. So certainty always has to be based on truth, as God has established the world. And there are some very, very lovely non-Christians out there who will go a long way to help you and are very pleasant. And they need to be prepared for that as well. And there are also some very nasty ones out there who will want to just eat you up and destroy you. You need to be prepared for that. So I think the stance you take on Christian education has to be much more positive rather than the retreatist, even though there is that estrangement we talked about right at the beginning that is happening at the same time. And then they will be in a better place to do that. But in the end, there is no hiding from the world. So I'm going to say one thing. Please do stay for this afternoon if you can. If you can't, that's fine. But if you're interested about Selden College, which is the university we're starting, you want to hear or be kept up to date about that, on our very uninformative web page, there is a link, and I mean that, where you can sign up to receive updates. So it's Selden, SELDEN, college.co.uk. Sign up for updates. And we're running a summer school this summer for people, families, the classes are focused on people who are going to be going to university in October 2025 or October 2026. but it's not limited to those people. So that details are on the website as well. Okay, but do stay this afternoon if you want to hear more. Ali, I'll hand over to you to finish up.